So my name is Anna Mugwera Gimba. I'm a partner at Gimba and Associates Advocates. My specialty is I'm a commercial lawyer, and I deal a lot with commercial organizations, NGOs, like most of you, as the civil society. I also specialize in instruments like trusts and trusts for commercial purposes. And what it is that we're talking about today is essentially trusts by for commercial purposes. We have been we're a law firm, and we have been operating for the last 25 years in Kenya. Our client base is both local and international, and across many fields. So we're a big team, and we are happy to serve you or ask you any questions across the board. So by way of endowment, this is the more technical way of looking at it. But I want you to think about the amount of money that normally donors give. So a donation is an endowment. A donation can be an endowment if you put it in a place and say, we are going to invest this money and then only draw out from the capital and use the interest and in certain portions. So in a simple format, it's basically the donations that you receive that you, instead of utilizing the donation in full, you use it and apply an interest to it, so it's invested for you. And then from the interest, do you then carry on your operations or your philanthropic activities? So that's in a simple way how I would put it, so that it's not so complicated. So sometimes you hear people who donate to churches or to hospitals or to universities. We know about, maybe we know about, we hear about Manu Chandaria Foundation, and you normally would see it, say, in hospitals. So that means that family put aside, say, 1 million shillings, and then in the 1 million shillings, an endowment fund was formed, and only the interest is utilized. So when the interest is utilized, then only the interest is utilized, then the capital stays as it is. So many organizations, which the leading organization actually in Kenya is the organizations hosting us today, which is KCDF, which has had the best or the leading endowment fund in our country. Across the world, we have other endowment funds that we know about. Maybe you hear the Rockefeller endowment funds. In our country. You can hear about Chandaria. When you say Chandaria Trust and stuff like that, those are normally endowment funds. So that means money put aside by a donor and the interest utilized for operations or the philanthropic activities. So a key thing about it is that the endowment funds are tax deductible. That means you, if you're an NGO, you know what it is that you do with your taxes. So the donations to an endowment funds are also tax deductible by the donor, right? And also by the person receiving them, the donations are also tax deductible. So the reason why people set up the endowment funds largely is to provide financial support for philanthropic endeavors, but usually it's for the long term, so that the amount of contribution is not always there. You have a fund and you grow the fund using other donations, and you only use the interest. So it's all because of that, and because the interest, because the capital is invested, then you have a consistent source of income for your organization and over the long term. So you're only eating out of the interest. So like, say, for example, a certain organization gives you 1 million shillings. So rather than you budgeting for 1 million shillings to utilize for your philanthropic activities that year, is that 1 million shillings, you'll put it into an investment fund. Let's imagine you put it in one of a safe investment fund, one of the treasury bills or bonds or the money market funds, which is a bit, of course, more risky. So usually the investment type is very conservative. So you put it in a treasury bill or bonds. The interest rate is at 15% per year. So it's only the 15% per year that you'll be using. It's not all of it. So a key thing for the organization as yourselves is that you'd be looking at increasing your endowment, growing your endowment fund at a faster rate. So your charity, the way you look for your donors is so that you can build your endowment fund, rather than looking for donors every year, year on, year out, trying to get your activities funded, and you're always back to zero. So when you hear, oh, the funding has stopped, as you can see, we are getting donor fatigue. So this is a really, really key conversation for you to have so that you can talk about sustainability. Over the last couple of years, we have seen an interest we've done several projects with international organizations where it is that they're saying there's donor fatigue going on, even by their governments, the big ones that we know that contribute, and they are looking at how they can make the organization, the NGOs, the civil society organizations more sustainable. And these endowment funds are a key thing towards building your sustainability. So that rather than you thinking that if you got 10 million shillings, then you use the entire 10 million shillings. No, it would mean that you use the 1.5 million shillings from your interest so that you can be able to serve people for a longer time. Maybe initially you'll serve fewer people because now you're not expending the 10 million shillings, but you're only going to expend 1.5 million shillings, but you will do so over a longer period of time because what? The 10 million shillings remains consistent, it remains as capital, and it remains as continuously being invested. So many times the investment, you do not mix your investment, this endowment funds with your other funds. For best practice across the world, normally the endowment fund is given to another entity to manage for you for the purpose of making sure that, and of course, a reputable organization, maybe it's a bank or another entity, you say you have a fund administrator, so that they can tell you what's going on within the fund, so that it's away from your from the organization's politics, it's away from the organization crisis or drama, so that it's kept perpetually growing and only for the purposes that it's been given for. So the power of an endowment fund is great because it means that you ensure lasting community impact because you have a permanent charitable fund. So it's more over the long term. It's more over the long term rather than the short term. So if you're lucky enough and you got some huge funding, 100 million, 300 million, or in in dollars and in millions of dollars, then this is the best way to create your organization, and so that you're looking at your organization not only serving the people that you serve right now, but growing and serving on up to perpetuity. So we do have very old endowment funds, many even over 100 years old, 200 years old, just because the person had the foresight to ensure that's an endowment fund, and with the rules and regulations placed in as the organization would decide, or by the donors as the donors could be direct, so that the community is impacted over the long term. So the types of endowment funds that are there is we have essentially there are 4, and they're very simple. And look at it from a very simple way. So first of all, we demystified the issue about an endowment fund. Endowment fund are those funds that you receive, but that are put aside and invested for philanthropic purposes or for your operations. So you can have a term endowment fund, you have an unrestricted endowment fund, a quasi endowment fund, and a restricted endowments. So when you have a term restricted, it just says exactly what it is. It exists for a specific time, right? So it could be a fund that's there, that is there, but maybe there is flooding right now in Kenya. So it's meant to be for that period for floods, but it's only the interest that's used. So maybe you contribute every year to floods, but it's only used at a specific, so it can be only even used at a specific time for a particular project or activity, right? And usually, or it can also be, and usually sometimes, many times it's usually for operations. So you need a fund for operations. And so that's when it is that's used. So it's time restricted. So it has quite some strictures. You have another one called unrestricted endowment. So that means that the fund has no limitations on how the donations can be used. You, the organization, have complete control. You can say it can go to for any of the philanthropic activities that you carry out, or it can go to doing your operations. And so it is as wide and as restricted as you want. And this means that the monies that are put in can be used as you wish or as you please, right? Then you have a quasi-endowment fund. You have a quasi-endowment fund, and this one is established inside an organization. There's a question that came at the beginning of the conversation where it was that do you have to set up a fund separately from your organization, or can you do it inside? Yes, you can establish a fund inside the organization, and then that fund contributes to, so the funds contribute to that fund. And the rules are also decided by the organizational stakeholders. This is the loosest, and normally this kind of fund, it works, but the organization has to be extremely strict, extremely disciplined, and sometimes it could be established inside, but they can take the funds outside to be managed by other people to ensure that the goal that they wish to pursue is gotten hold of. And then we have the restricted endowment. So the restricted endowment means it's only as per the agreed terms and rules of engagement. So like, say, for example, an endowment, a restricted endowment could say, out of we started with a 10 million shilling endowment fund, which is invested and then gets 1.5 million shilling as interest payment. So this 1.5 million shillings is given different sort of categories, and said 50% of that fund will be used for your philanthropic activities. Only 10% will be used for operations, and it cannot go any more. And then the other 40% is reinvested so that it keeps on growing. So this restricted endowment is as per agreed terms and rules for either the donor or the donee or the organization itself, so that it is restricted as to its use, its percentages, its purpose, all those, it's restricted. And so you have to know how to use your endowment funds. Sometimes you could have a huge endowment fund, but you can have the various categories inside it, depending on your goals and what it is that you wish to achieve. So I spoke about this right at the beginning, and I asked, what are the advantages of the endowment funds? Why would you want to consider that? So as we said, it's a financial support for the organization. So it helps you achieve your goals. So you will not ever be without that the organization has to close as a result of not having funding for operations. Maybe you could be able to scale down if the donors have gone down, but you can be able to keep your doors open, or you can continue your philanthropic activities because there'll always be money. As I said, it serves as the organization's consistent source of income. And then the fund gives the organization yearly fund additional support, so that you can also use it to get even more funds. And donors really like this because it means that you can work towards being self, what's the word? You can, there's an end to how much donations can be given to you. Some donor funds some people have gotten donor funds over the years, for many years. And if they've had an endowment fund and have good policies with it, it means they're still existing and they don't need donors anymore. So in the throes of what's happening all across the world and donor fatigue, I don't think that civil society has a choice in this. It's more like, how do we start? How do we grow this thing? And what's the easiest way to go about this thing? And the professional managers, if you have the professional managers who are managing your fund, then you know there's maximum due diligence in managing the funds that you have put them in charge. And then you can also use the funds for other activities that you may wish to grow in as you grow. You could also, sometimes you see civil society organizations can use a fund to assist the commercial arm of their organization, if at all, because it falls within their rules and regulations as would be expected. So a disadvantage about it is sometimes if it's under restricted or quasi-restricted, as we have seen on my previous slides, it means only certain purposes may be served by the contributions given through individual donations. And then there can be limitations on when you can withdraw money, because maybe you're told part of the restrictions is you only withdraw money once a year, which can make things occasionally difficult. So as you plan this and plan the endowment funds, you have to look at the character of the organization, the character of the needs of the ones that you serve, the operations, and so on and so forth. So as you're growing it, you know how to sector things so that you're not put into any difficulty, because you put all your funds inside a restricted endowment. Also, if the donors are giving you the funds, it's also possible for you to know and understand your donor and see who's willing to give you unrestricted funds for your endowment fund, or the ones who have restrictions, so that you can also make your when you're making your pitch, it is clear on your intention. So ordinarily, donors are not very averse to any way that you wish to carry out your style of your organization. You just have to have said it in the beginning so that they know who they're dealing with and how you deal with the funds. And it's also important to let the donors know that when the funds are coming they're important to say, it's important to note that those are for endowment purposes. And because some donors feel differently about this, so it's an important thing to put your point across. So also because of that, and we've talked about because of the limitations on fund usage or restrictions on withdrawals, so it's important for you to have sight of your organization. This is not a decision you make just on one day. You can look at your organization, look at your future plan in terms of how you plan to grow the organization or its ambitions, and so that you can be able to sector all the funds that you receive. Either some are for restricted funds, endowment funds, others are for a different type of funding, but in a way that makes you sustainable. Also, if you talk to the fund managers and so on and so forth, they could assist you in terms of structure once they understand your strategy. So in terms of the requirements for endowment fund management, it's important to balance your competing interests, because there are many competing interests which to advance your goals sustainably. So in it, as you have the endowment fund, you must make sure that you have clear policies that you have formulated so that you can be successful in terms of how you carry out the endowment. So you have to formulate your goals so that you can know how much. Maybe now, if you're starting out to get to create an endowment fund, perhaps to be clear that you wanted initially to serve 1,000 people, maybe now you'll only serve 100 people, but you could serve 100 people for the next 30 years rather than 1,000 people today. All right, so you may have to shift your goals. So you formulate the goals that you want to achieve. The other thing is also on asset allocation, because we said these funds are invested. So when a fund is invested, it's essentially an asset. So you have to have policies towards them. As you say, you have your asset allocation policies so that you can say this particular fund is for this purpose, and we do it this way because of the goal that we want to achieve. The other important thing is about manager selection. The manager selection is also key, because you need people who understand the goals of the organization and at the same time are good managers of funds and the strategy. And of course, there's the risk management in terms of if, for example, for civil society organizations, sometimes they're formed by individuals or just a couple of individuals. In terms of that, sometimes also across the world, many times what happens is those key people in the organization also carry on themselves their life insurance policies that are tied to the organization, especially if it is people or persons of interest who have set up the endowment funds themselves. They could also carry on an insurance policy with it, so that at the point of their demise, they do not want their fund to close up. Instead, the monies paid out of their life insurance can be part of it that continues growing the fund, and this practice can go on and on with also the next key person who comes in, and that ensures that there's always money that's also replenishing the fund by itself, by having the key men in your organization also insured, either with a group life accident, a group life insurance, or a life insurance policy. And then also you'd be looking at expense reduction as much as possible, so that you're running the organization as efficiently as possible and utilizing least resources. And that means you are having experts getting you the least risk and the most return. for the endowment fund that you'll have put aside. So I'll just go through some of the frequently asked questions by my clients, and then we'll have answered some of the questions that you have, so that at the end of it, you do feel that we went through something that you understand. So we asked, so how does an endowment fund work? So as a matter of fact, one of the things that you have to understand is an endowment fund is normally formed as a trust. And also it can be by using a company limited by guarantee. But usually it's a trust, and that's why you hear trust funds. And so usually it's by a trust fund, and so there is the persons, the donors who contribute the amounts, and then there are the trustees who work on achieving the purpose and who are in charge of the finances of that endowment fund. So think about it in that way. And usually, what are the components of an endowment fund? The components of an endowment fund are essentially that you have an endowment. You have the person who's, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. What are the components of an endowment fund? It's essentially the person who donates. There's a person who looks after the funds. There's a person who's in charge of the funds. And then that, of course, are the beneficiaries of the funds. And those are the beneficiaries means your people who are benefiting from the fund that has been put up. And then what are the policies of the endowments? The policies of the endowment are as the organization wishes. And so we talked about a little bit about the policies that you can put aside, the management policy, the investment policies of the endowment. How do you invest these monies? And all those policies, how do you contribute, to who do you contribute, when do you contribute? So essentially it works more or less like how you do your funds when you received your donor funds and the policies that you have towards them, but now it's specified for the endowment. And the purpose for an endowment fund, to ensure that you have continued income for the long term for your philanthropic activities and for your operations. And then the question is, how much money is needed for an endowment fund? You can start with as little as possible, and you can grow it for as much as you can. When I say as little as possible, it means that you can start off with what it is that you have and look at it from a growth perspective. Yes, and so that brings me to the end of that question, but to the end of the frequently asked questions. But to reiterate my earlier conversation, there's a lot of donor fatigue happening, and so we need to look at the endowment funds as a way to make sure that we can run independently with the funds that we are receiving and looking at it from a long-term strategic perspective. With those few remarks, I thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that enlightening presentation. So maybe we can just look at the chat box. There are, I think, 2 questions that we could take before we open up the floor to the rest of the participants.
Okay, I'm seeing that Susan Jambi is asking, at what point do you bring in legal support in endowment building, and is it necessary? Now, yes, it is important to bring in an endowment, to bring in a legal person to do your endowment fund, and because any monies that are coming into the organizations must be answered to. The government regulations have been quite strict about that, so it is important that you have a good policy framework and governance around it, so that you can be able to support whatever position you have within that fund. Also, you realize also financial institutions can get very tricky. As you can see, our countries are in the gray list. Say Kenya is in the gray list, and it can make it very difficult for you if you do not have legal advice in terms of how to place your funds, how you're receiving your funds, and why you're investing them in a certain way. If you're an NGO and you know you're meant to do your returns, and yet these monies are being invested and it's not quite clear how you're carrying on your funds, there's going to be trouble sooner rather than later. So it is important to seek legal advice immediately you wish to start your endowment fund. Also, in addition to that, is because you need to understand if the documentation that you have in place allows you to set up an endowment fund, or it doesn't allow you. Also, the partners and donors that you work with, do they allow you or don't they allow you to work to set up such a fund? So it's a thorough process where it is that your organization is looked at in terms of the documentation of starting, all the other policies, your donors are looked at, and so that when you're setting up your endowment fund, you know you're free and clear to set it up as you wish or as per the directions. And what opportunities you may also grow with your donor, with your donor. Sometimes when you have it well structured, the advocate is also able to advise you as to the other opportunities that are available to you because of the structure that you have. So the next question I have is, how can a trust establish an endowment fund that has just moved? I'll start with, let me just go right at the beginning. Okay, I think the question I'm seeing right now is, what is the difference between a reserve policy and an endowment fund? So a reserve policy is the funds that you put aside for emergencies, but they don't necessarily mean for growth. They just mean for emergency and for the solidity of the organization. An endowment fund, however, is different in the sense that the funds are, when they're gathered, they are put into an interest earning capacity, so that you only use the interest to carry out your philanthropic activities or your operations. A reserve fund is kept as a standardized amount that is not for utilization. It's more for the stability of the organization. So that is the main difference between a reserve policy or reserve fund and an endowment fund. So the endowment fund continues your organizational work. A reserve fund is for the security of your organization. So in the morning, Maureen Kemunto asked how long it takes to register a foundation in Kenya, and I'm told I'm the best person to answer this. So to register a foundation in Kenya, it depends on what stage you want to start with. It can take you anywhere between 3 weeks and ongoing up to 2 years. Also, it's important to discuss if it's just the right instrument for you and what it is that the purpose that you wish to achieve. And so it can take you anywhere between 3 weeks and moving forward, depending on the people who are signing in, because there are also other considerations sometimes that government looks at. So I would say at minimum, at about 3 to 4 weeks, we should be able to have started the first stage of the foundation. So there was a question: are there samples that you can show on the policies to have for the endowment fund? I would look at it in terms of the policies that you already have for how you run the organization. They somewhat emanate from that kind of conversation, and because it would also follow the style of the organization that you are in already. Maybe what happens is also based on your needs and the strategy for your organization, then the policies also come from there. So this is something that would maybe call for maybe a further conversation, because you're talking about the investment policies. So the question is, how do you do so right now, or don't you have that? So you need to talk to somebody, need to talk to a partner who has, the banks or investment partners that you have. Then from there, we're able to formulate those policies and have them down on paper. That's from a legal standpoint. So it comes from the conversations that you'd have with different stakeholders. Then we're able to draw out what it is that you need to suit your purpose. So the question that Vanessa has asked is, how can a trust establish an endowment fund? And she says, we are a registered trust in Tanzania, a foundation. And what would an endowment fund look like for us? Do we set up a separate trust, or is endowment managed by the board of trustees? Okay. Yes, a trust can establish an endowment fund. And how would it look for you? As I said, it would depend on your goals and the strategy, and also who your donors are, so that endowment would then look at the goals that you wish to achieve. And then the purpose for the endowment fund is drawn like. It's usually advisable to have a separate fund other than the trust, because when the trust is established, it's usually for a separate purpose. So the endowment fund can be used to fund the trust, so that you have the two entities somewhat running, they run together but separately, just for clear governance. And then she has to set up a separate trust. So I've answered that question. So it's best usually to set up a separate endowment fund, so that the trust is able to run independently based on its constitution, and the endowment fund has its own constitution that is set up that can then help you manage the funds in a separate way. So somebody else has asked, can an endowment fund be a mix of the different types, like restricted and quasi? Yes, it can. You just don't have them in the same pot. You just have the different funds and have them. So, can have endowment fund, Maisha endowment fund, which does the restricted ones and several, because of the nature of the organization. So yes, you can have it as a mixture or of different types. I talked about particular one, which are called a quasi inside the organization, which is a quasi endowment fund, where you can even have different ones and also mix it up as you wish. A law doesn't restrict you. It just tells you where you can't go, but you can go anywhere until it tells you where you can't go. So that there's a capital referred to the initial money put in or also the subsequent top-ups. It can also include, this is from Teresia Njoroge, and these funds can also include subsequent top-ups. So you can grow the fund to as big as possible until the day you don't need funds anymore because you're extremely wealthy. So now you have $100 billion. So it is possible to continue topping up the fund, and that would be captured within the constitution or the documents that will be drawn up at the onset and say this is a continued growing a fund, or it's restricted. So yes, that can be captured.
Thank you for the presentation. So I get the impression that a person with a registered organization can be able to run an endowment fund kind of as a program. I have a company limited by guarantee, and I think earlier we had been told that a company limited by guarantee and a trust can work. So what would be, how long would it take if I was to begin something like that? If I was to begin running it as a program, maybe as I decide if we want to expand it to be something separate on its own, or to just run it as a program within the organization. Asante.
Thank you, Kingwa, for that question. Maybe I could answer it this way. Number one, it would depend on your organization, or on how your organization has been set up. If you have that kind of organization, it depends on how your organization has been set up in terms of, does it allow you to do that or it doesn't allow you to do that. As I said, the government is very particular on people collecting funds and even storing funds in any format if it is not well documented. So my first disclaimer would be, you can start it at any time, so long as you make sure that your documentation allows it. Make sure that the lawyer looks at your documents and makes sure that your documents do allow you to be able to get the funds and from donors and put them aside for that purpose that I indicated. At the same time, I also noted that your donors would also be privy to, would maybe check also at their also their terms and conditions to make sure that you're not crossing any lines. So you have to check the regulation according to the government regulation and also your donor regulation, and you can start it as soon as you can.
Thank you very much. My name is Joseph Mudama. I wanted to know if an organization, like, for example, I'm running an NGO, and then we want now to start an endowment fund. And we know that we have to have some trustees to manage it. And maybe the regulator, that is the NGO board, does not allow us to do that. Is there a way I can go around it so that we can have an endowment fund? We run it as an NGO, but then within us, we nominate some trustees to manage it. And the second question is, if we have the endowment fund, is endowment fund the same as immovable properties, which we invest in now as an NGO. We can have buildings, we can have plots, which actually generate funds for us, but then we don't use the capital at that time. Can we equate that one to an endowment fund? Well, I'm talking now of something like a house, something like maybe a vehicle where we shall be eating the fare people contribute, but the vehicle remains on the road running.
If you're not allowed, if your NGO is not allowed to do that, yes, set up a separate entity. So the separate trust can be set up. And then, yes, those assets can be used as part of the endowment fund. But you can hear, they can be used as part of the endowment for the fund. So there'd be not necessarily an endowment per fund, but an endowment for the fund because of its drawing out a certain amount of capital from it. Ordinarily, when we talk about endowment funds, people normally look at it from a cash perspective that's invested because of its ease of use. But yes, you can have a property that has been endowed on you that you use the money is derived out of it for your purpose.
Okay, I was wondering if we have set up a team for the endowment fund, and then that team proposes an investment that does not give good return or does not give any return at all, who will be liable for that?
So, Abiba,
will the team be asked to pay something back?
Okay, so thank you for that, Abiba. Once you establish a dedicated team to oversee the implementation of your fund, number one, the expectation that there would be as a trustee is that you have chosen the best people to make the decision. If they're the best people to make the decision, courtesy of the expertise and because of the expertise and knowledge of what it is that you're tasking them to do, then there's no reason why anybody should be held liable, because the market always goes up and it also goes down. What I could imagine is, from a governance issue, is the task would be, what this the best people to run the fund, the people who are chosen, are they the best people to run the fund, and do they understand the money? And as a result of that, if they don't quite understand the money, then you pick up professionals, a professional entity that is experienced and normally makes good decisions to help you oversee that. The small percentage is enough to show that you have acted to the best of your ability, because trustees do have a duty, a fiduciary duty, to protect the monies that come to them, and so that you have to have made the best decision and responsible decisions towards the money that you have been given to handle.
Thank you.
And so maybe just to put on a talking point on that, that's why you can see, other people who run funds, say like pension funds and organizations such as those, they give them to experts to run it, because you could understand that you do know your work, but you don't necessarily know how to run money. So you do give it to an expert to assist you have your best returns possible. They want to make you more money because they make more money when you make more money. So it's one of the things that I would suggest you don't do it yourself, just for also to keep away any sort of liability that you made careless mistakes. Thank you. But they are representatives, if you say from a CBO, in that case, it was maybe from a community-based entity. So what would happen is that you have the trustees who have been selected, and they are trustworthy, who are experienced in terms of knowing what it is the goals of the organization are, and are well educated. Then the other thing is, for the donors, you have your rules that have been set up. And then you always have to have somebody who oversees to make sure that the beneficiaries are getting what it is that they're supposed to be getting. Also within the organization, you should make sure there's a conflict mechanism, where it is that if there are disputes within the organization, how those disputes are settled. Because many times the disputes go to court because people don't have a way to settle the dispute internally. So a dispute mechanism resolution is set up within the organization, within the governance structure, so that those problems can be sorted out. Also, the rotational of members, that's also very important, and also selection of members, so that you never have some people who have too much interest within that organization who are controlling everybody else. That's so that you try and give it the face of the community, so that as much as possible, you're able to run an entity that is really above board. And also, sometimes you have members who join in who are just spoilers. There should be mechanisms within which you're able to remove spoilers. And a spoiler doesn't mean that, it just means someone who's not for the interest of the organization. Sometimes you also put in the people who are the people who dreamt about the organization, the dream keepers of the organization, can also have a voting role, so that the spirit of the organization always remains as it is. Their representatives, they're not, and they're normally there for advisory. So they don't normally vote for anything, but they're there as an advisor to make sure that the goal of the organization is kept simple. And now we're talking about something a little bit more complex for an organization that can be more complex, which involves maybe many people or many stakeholders or a huge community.
One more question from one of the participants asking whether the banks provide endowment management services. And then similarly, still on the same question, they want to know the percentage the fund managers charge or the commission on the investment made as part of the endowment fund.
Banks provide endowment services. They provide, they would normally be the custodians of the funds, of the funds, and they can also, they would work together with maybe your fund administrator or fund manager. You know, they would normally work in that format, because you normally would have the people who are helping you on the finance side, and then the banks would follow the rules that have been set up, and maybe in terms of when payments are made, when the interests are to be paid out, and or to the bank accounts that are to be paid out to other people, so that the trustees also don't necessarily have to really handle a lot of monies here and there, and the team that you can assemble can be able to carry you through and be able to run a very professional organization, just because you're using a good support system. So the banks do provide a section of it, but not as much as you may think, because there are different rules for everybody. So, but the banks would be the custodians of the funds. Was that the last question?
Yes, so maybe let me just give a chance to Francis to ask the final, and then I can do the closing overview.
I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Thank you. In our organization, we have some boards of trustees that were appointed according to the laws of our country. Is it possible that in appointing some of the boards of trustees to run the endowment fund, we can identify those with skills to invest the money and then pick some from the established boards that we have? Is this one possible?
Yes, that is possible if they have the skills. If not, the skills can be availed to you by the different maybe banks or fund managers that could be around you. And then they work together with them, but that is possible. A very pertinent question, and it's a question that everybody, maybe people in the room, are asking. So sometimes how organizations go, or entities or self-help groups go about creating that kind of fund, is that maybe you can give it a period of time and say, we're going to be able to donate or contribute. The word we normally use when you're talking about self-help, we say is contribute. We're going to contribute this for a period of time. Maybe for the next 1 year, each member is going to contribute a certain amount X. So then when we contribute this amount X, then we are it's going to help us start the endowment fund. And then from that point, we will continue increasing it. And from the interest, that's what it is that we're going to use to fund certain things. So it is, as I said, it can be a slower process, but it is a good process. Many times when a donor hears there's a self-help group doing that, they can give us seed capital to help build the endowment fund. So it's really, really a good way to do it. Even sometimes your area politicians can be looked upon to help fund such self-help groups to create an endowment fund. So long as you show that the governance system is very strong, the monies to be used, are you being utilized in a professional way? You have the correct policies that are put down in terms of your goals and your strategies, then it is a very good way of growing, you know, the in a sustainable way. There was another hand.
Yes. Hi, Adonis. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, thank you. It is not even a question. We would like to understand more about the registration, because as an organization, maybe, does it need a different board to now register as a for an endowment fund? Secondly, will it need different bank accounts, or will an organization can still use the same bank account? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. One, you can still use the same board to run the endowment fund. What it is that we said is that maybe the endowment fund can have its own peculiar policy if it doesn't mirror what the mother organization is doing. But for the bank account, it should be an account so that the funds are not intermingled, and you can see what interest payments that are coming in, so that whatever profits are obtained is what's being used by the endowment fund goals.
Florence, you can proceed.
Thank you so much, Anne and Bire. I would like to know, I want to give an example. There is an NGO in Uganda here, particularly in Teso, where I come from, which has established independent investment enterprise, and with the independent board of directors and the ED operating. Are they eligible to access the endowment fund? I wanted to know, because they have registered it independently as an agency and they are doing business. And the other one goes to Bire. I want to appreciate for you for organizing this particular event. My concern is that I think from morning, the presenters based their presentations relating to Kenya. I really wanted this event to be domesticated to 3 countries that are actually taking part in this training. That is Uganda and Tanzania. What are the different mechanisms? How do different mechanisms from different countries resonate to each other? So that we really appreciate how best we can handle or learn from the others. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Florence, for that question. Number one, I was in Uganda last week in the Masindi. I was in Masindi last week, Uganda, and it's a beautiful area. I'm just saying that because Uganda, as we talk, we are talking as East Africa, and the rules and regulations that we share are very similar. We follow very similar. Our laws are very much synchronized. So the distinctions could be very small, but the reason why this was arranged for East Africa, and we're talking on my end, I've talked about it from basically an East African perspective, is those policies that are here are also there, or the conversation that we're talking about is not segmented only to Kenya, but is generally quite wide. I do know that Tanzania had some restrictions last year with some years back with the NGOs, and it has been quite rough. And the same went on right through up to Kenya and Uganda. We all faced challenges when it came to that in terms of streamlining the NGO and the civil society in that regard. So in the conversation that we're having is no distinction. Perhaps, as I said, what is really distinct is your particular organization and how that is to be applied for. So on the question that Florence is asking about setting up an agency, again, sometimes people do set up, they do set up certain things or certain ways that they are doing their business. But the question is, I don't know if the way you've mentioned an agency, if an agency is in Kenya, in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, an agency is not allowed to collect money for donations. So in that way, I don't think that what they're having is an endowment fund. It could be their own way of thinking about something, but an agency is a different sort of entity.
Thank you, Anne, for that response, and I hope it clarifies the question that our participants had. But that's not the end. If you have any question, please text them in the chat. In the next session, we'll be able to address them even if we run short of time. But allow me just to reiterate what Florence has mentioned. So we are co-creating these sessions as East Africa, and by East Africa, I mean Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. So it's by no chance that we are focusing on the spectrums across, or maybe just affecting one country. And as Anne has mentioned, you realize that all those regulatory frameworks that impact Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya cut across. And that's why you're having such initiatives to ensure that in the spirit of co-creating the East Africa Financial Resilience Resource Hub, we're able to address these overarching challenges that organizations grapple them from day to day. And maybe just to implore all of us that in as much as we take the lessons, we just need to take analogy of, let me say swimming. You can't swim by just reading about it, watching people do it. You just have to also take a dive and see how best it takes you. So I hope maybe the commitment from these sessions would be, how do we start, how do we set up, how do we grow, and how do we expand our endowment funds? So there's a question around restrictions, and probably if you set up an endowment fund and you want to close it, as KCDF, we have a stand, and for us, we support organizations to look at endowment fund as a tree. So once you plant a tree, you water it, it grows, and you start reaping from its fruits, the leaves, the bark, and the wood, but now you don't chop off the tree. So we encourage organizations to have a sinking fund. So you will continue reaping from the proceeds you get. The profits could be 10%, 5%, 50%, but you also need to start plowing back, growing the endowment fund to serve not only the organizational focus at the moment, but also to look beyond the current, to look at the future. So we support organizations just to have an endowment fund that lasts for posterity. So KCDF started its endowment fund in 2002, and there is no plans for us to deplete it. The aim is just to take out, but then keep increasing the principles so that you have a fund or a pool of resources that you can actually utilize to grow your organization going forward. So as we proceed, there'll be a cycle like the one we've had today on Wednesday, and the first session will be at 10 to 11:30, and the second from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Kindly purpose to attend. Yeah, and I've also seen a question, quite a number of people are interested in terms of just receiving the training resources. So all the presentation that I've made earlier today and even now will be shared by the end of the day on Wednesday. So you'll get those resources. And I'm trying to comb through my inbox to see whether there is any question that's of significant attention that we might have missed out. Yes, let me just respond to this. Do you mean KCDF can support setting up of an endowment fund? Yes, and this question is from Judith Gondi. Gondi, so KCDF is supporting organizations to be like itself. We are looking at organizations that have the means, have legitimacy, and have a resonance. And they just want to have an endowment fund that could support them to be able to, one, diversify their sources of income, and also create a pool that they can rely on whenever there's emergency or they want to critical mass of resources that they can get from the unrestricted resources. So the first bit we are doing to support or to ensure that organizations are able to have an endowment fund is to have forums like the ones we're having today. We train the organizations. We also share additional resources. And we've documented 16 case stories on how organizations in East Africa are working on their sustainability journey. So very soon we'll be launching a platform that domiciles all these resources, and each and every one of you is welcome to go scan through, learn, and then be able to see how best they can actualize their dream of having an endowment fund. So these will be sharing in the next bit as we have all your contacts. So I can see 2 hands up, and let's just take these 2 hands and then we can sum it up. So Linda or Kao, kindly unmute yourself and share your feedback, if any.